Hello everyone, this is Zibo and welcome to today's Who to Pull video. So in today's video, we'll run through as usual the 4 fire units in the banner up, as well as talk about which one of them is worthy of your gems and whether or not you should pull for them based on your personal needs as well as what you want to achieve within Guardian Tales itself. So first of all, I'll start with the new character, Sword of Werbe's Rey. So Rey's 3 phrases are pretty straightforward. Number 1, meta. Number 2, very powerful earth counter. Number 3, she's very versatile. So number 1, she's very meta because melee crit team is one of the strongest comp in the arena right now, and she's a melee unit and she's a crit unit and she fits perfectly in that team archetype. So the team archetype is really solid, and you have a pretty solid unit all around. It makes her really powerful in that team setup itself. And at the same time, right, outside of arena, she's probably a must-have for raid because of her like melee defense debuff as well as her kit. Because she's a melee unit, she has a offensive party buff which is crit chance plus 40%, and she's just usable in fire melee teams, very usable in dark melee teams or even future melee teams to come as you progress further into the game. So that's why she's super meta, and you should probably pull for her if you do not have an all-rounder unit. Like, I think this brings me to my third point, right? Like, she's very versatile because she's not like a strictly arena unit. She's not like a strictly PvE unit. So let's say if you are using her for raid and you kind of want to play arena with her, it's very doable, right? You can also try to run her in like Amazons where you fight multiple enemies and she's able to use her counter mechanics as well as deal AoE damage safely. So that's one way you can use her. And obviously her melee defense buff is something which is really precious, because if Lynn is used for that debuff, right, then Rey is definitely warranted because she deals way more damage than compared to Lynn, and she has like so much more to her kit in terms of like, you know, buffing your whole party and also like making her damage output even more insane than it is with the counter buff, you know, from the attack as well as defense buff. So that's one thing to take note about Rey. And lastly, she's, like I mentioned, like that's one of the strongest earth counter around, because earth units in general, they are very head on, right? They want to fight you on the spot, you know, like units like Rue, Mayriel, Kamel. Right now they are units that, you know, just want to kill you as fast as possible. So, you know, if you face them against Rey, right, like Rey can just simply counter them and then start to chop them down because she has the elemental advantage, and when she counters, she get a buff, and overall she's just gonna like just beat down most of the earth units. In fact, I think she beats all earth units very convincingly, right? I think she beats Kamel very convincingly, she beats Mayriel pretty convincingly, and I think she beats Rue very convincingly. But Rue is a beast, so there's a possibility that if you have a really powerful Rue on the opponent's side, maybe she can't beat Rue hands down. But then again, like I mentioned, every other earth unit just falls to her, so that's one thing I like about her. And lastly, one point that I want to mention about her that is not within the 3 points is that she's a very intuition reliant, or rather like a skill reliant unit. Like, she's a unit where the secondary ability retaliation is really important. Like, if you miss it, you're gonna lose a big part of her potential. So she's not a unit which, you know, like brainlessly go in and then start hacking on your opponent. So if you're somebody who prefers that playstyle, she might not be as fun for you, because you kind of need to time your stuff. You know, you don't know when your opponent is gonna run away from you, you know, when your opponent is gonna land their normal attacks on you. And I strongly don't encourage you to use retaliation to retaliate weapon skill damage, because you get the CC percentage and you get chained more easily if you just stand still on the spot. So that's one thing about her. But overall, very powerful unit, and I can see her being used by a lot of people. But right now in the global server, there are a ton of very powerful water units that just counters her a lot, right? We have Ara, we have Hana, so she might not be as impactful as she is in the CN server, but nonetheless she will still be a very meta fire unit in the pool when she's released. Okay, so next up we have Flame Harpy Scintilla. So the 3 phrases that I have for her: number 1, same power level as Werbe's Rey; number 2, fire uprising meta; and number 3, very flexible in terms of playstyle. So number 1, she's in the same tier as Rey because I think her power level as a whole is like massively increased in the recent patch, as they increase her defense from the ignition assault, you know, the buff for the defense defense buff increased from 1 second to 2 seconds. So this might not sound like a lot, like 1 second more, you know, what can you do? But this effectively reduces the downtime on this buff when you use your initial ability. So this will make her a lot better in dogfighting, and you know, she doesn't have to like keep on running. You know, she can just use her ignition buff and then continuously kick you, because the defense buff is gonna set in for quite a bit. If you think about all the defense stacking, this ability is pretty insane. If they were to buff it to 3 seconds, right, she will be an insane unit in my honest opinion. Then the next thing about her, right, is obviously the buff in numbers. They changed the number for her chain skill as well as her weapon skill numbers, right? So if in case you guys want to find out the numbers changes, just go and visit the everything you need to know about the Rey patch and you should be able to see it. So previously Scintilla has already been buffed 1 round, and right now I think the buff to her is, I'll say, quite massive overall. Like, she's basically receiving a rule treatment where she's gonna be like the upcoming fire unit. So if one day fire meta is gonna rise again, like if they get a really powerful fire tank and you know you have like Rey and then you have Scintilla, you're probably gonna get a really solid mono fire unit. And yeah, she's gonna be a nuisance like rule right now. So that's one thing that I'm worried about. Like, she's actually really flexible. So this brings me to my third point, right, where I mentioned that she's very flexible. Like, she is not really like, you know, I need to man fight you, right, I need to fight you and kill you before you kill me kind of unit. You can play her that way, right? You can also play her in the, you know, like I'm gonna dodge you and then use my weapon skill to chain you. Or you can also use her to, you know, like use the ignition ability to dodge stuff left and right. So her playstyle as a whole is a lot more flexible compared to Rey, and that's what I like about Scintilla. And lastly, I think her short story is also really cute. So if you guys like her short story and you like her muscle loving antics, then she's probably gonna be a top tier pull for you as well. I think if you compare her to Rey, I'll take Rey because Rey's crit hit chance party buff is just generally better. But then again, Scintilla is probably next to Rey in terms of the listing. So yep, if you talk about the weaknesses that Scintilla have, I think obviously is, you know, if your opponent is really good, they can abuse the gap where she doesn't get her defense buff. So then again, like I think I'll say that, you know, all water units are counter to fire units, so that's not really a massive one. And in terms of, you know, being useful, I think Scintilla and Rey, they are both really useful. So not too much negative things I can say about Scintilla, at least when you compare her to every other units on this list. Okay, so next up we have Drunken Swordsman Lynn. I think I did a video with the 3 phrases for her, so there might be some repeat from that because Lynn hasn't really changed much, but I think I have something new for her. Number 1, she's falling off slowly, right? Number 2, she's very powerful if your opponent doesn't have injury negation card. And number 3, she's like a wild card kind of unit in the game itself. So first of all, like I mentioned earlier, she hasn't really received a lot of changes recently, right? She got a buff to her chain skill in the latest patch, but that's that. Like, her whole kit hasn't really changed a lot. So in terms of like other units getting buffed, like Pilvice getting buffed, you know, Scintilla getting buffed, Rey being released, and Visuvac getting buffed as well, like Lynn just pales a bit in terms of, you know, like power level. But then again, like her second phrase just explains her, right? Like, she is like a unit that pushes the usage of injury negation card. So if you're fighting an enemy that doesn't have injury negation card, she can still be a wildcard character. Like, she can be a very powerful melee unit in your party if your opponent is not prepared for her. But as the stats continuously grows, I think the damage that she can deal from, like, you know, the brief fire ability and cheesing damage, as well as, you know, like getting burns on your enemy, is not gonna be as much. And the thing about her is that she holds a one-handed sword, and her stats distribution, although it's pretty good, but it's not, you know, like as amazing as Marina. And one thing about one-handed sword is that one-handed sword doesn't really offer a lot in terms of the buffs itself. So if you look at this, right, the HP is not a lot, the defense is not a lot, the skill damage is not a lot as well. So like that's one weakness that I'll say for like all the one-handed sword unit, is that, you know, because all this stats distribution from the weapons itself is not as much if you compare this to, like, for example, Ifrit. Like if you take a look at Ifrit, right, Ifrit is plus 22%, plus 20%, plus 18%. So you know, this few percentage difference will make a lot of difference if you stack all the different party buff as well as your book knowledge and stuff all together. So like in the long run, I think, you know, Lynn will not be as strong unless they do something about her. But then again, given the history of the games buffing older units, Lynn will definitely get buffed if she's underpowered. She's by no means underpowered, but she's not the strongest unit. So if you want me to rank the 3 units from like Rey, Scintilla to Lynn, right, I'll say that Rey and Scintilla is definitely above Lynn. And if you're putting for Scintilla, I think Lynn is definitely a skippable unit because they basically do the same thing in arena. Although, like, you know, Lynn has this injury like wildcard thing going on for her, but then again, Scintilla does so much damage now that I think she makes up for that. And in terms of rate, right, Scintilla is a lot better because Scintilla has a fire resist down. So why would you use Lynn if you already have a Scintilla? So that's why I think, yeah, she's probably lower priority compared to Scintilla, but still a good pool nonetheless if you like, you know, some Chinese costume designs or some Chinese drunken swordsman design. Okay, lastly, we'll end off the video with Goddess of War Piltvice. The 3 phrases that I have for Piltvice, or rather, never mind, I'll skip the 3 phrases for her. I'll talk about why Piltvice will be good in the upcoming patch and why she may not be as good in the upcoming patch. So first of all, I'll talk about the not as good part. Firstly, I think the buffs to her, it may be really good, but Piltvice's fundamental issue is with regards to chasing the opponent in arena. So she also doesn't have a debuff type ability, like she doesn't have a melee defense debuff, neither does she have a fire element debuff, or like she also doesn't have like a crit hit multiplier buff for the whole party. So she's not really like a top tier pick for the guild raids. But her fire attack buff is quite powerful if you stack her with the likes of Scintilla as well as Rey, because melee plus fire is like a way more efficient buff compared to running double melee. But the thing about the fire melee team is that I think it doesn't really run Piltvice right now. I think they run Scintilla, they run Lilith for the defense reduction, they run Rey for the melee defense, and I think they run another defense debuff unit. I can't really remember what, but that's for the fire side, and Piltvice isn't really used there. So that's one thing which I think, like, she's not as attractive in terms of rate, but she's definitely usable there, right? You can pair her with all the fire mini unit and she'll make a very solid buffer in the team. And the thing about Piltvice now is that I think the changes, the 2 massive change is, number 1, the chain to her chain skill, which increases the duration of the buff from 10 seconds to 15 seconds. So these 5 additional seconds might not sound a lot, but this buff, right, being carried over to the next round makes a big difference in arena. So if you get your chain off, like what will happen with Piltvice is that she has the ability to negate your opponent's weapon skill, and then your opponent can't chain her, and then she will use her weapon skill and then chain your opponent, and then use power liberation, do a lot of damage, and carry over the buff for her normal attack as well as the defense buff to the next round, so she can do a massive amount of damage to the next enemy before dying. So she will be way more efficient in terms of trading. And in terms of the Colosseum side, right, like, she's a lot better because previously she only restored her own HP by 2%, which was very selfish, but right now she's able to restore the whole team's HP by 2%. So just imagine this, right? Camille is 5%, Visual Vac is 1%. So if you combine Visual Vac with Piltvice in a fire Colosseum team, you are getting a 3% heal per second. So that's quite a sustainable heal, although not as powerful as compared to Camille's 5% per hit. So that's one thing to take note. But then again, like, Piltvice has always been a okay Colosseum unit, but with the, like, introduction of more and more powerful Colosseum units, you don't really see her around as much. So I myself tried to run her as a leader with her weapon skills, which can heal your team and, you know, remove debuff. And then she can also heal a lot with her exclusive weapon ability. So right now I think the fire melee team is gonna be a really solid team moving forward in the Colosseum. If people dare to try them, I guarantee there'll be some form of results. You might not get like top 10, but top 100 I think is definitely achievable. Although, you know, you might encounter some Ara on the way, and Ara can kind of counter you. But then again, I beat Ara teams in Colosseum with my fire mini teams before, so it's definitely doable. And yeah, that's my thought about her in the Colosseum. And for the arena side, like I mentioned, she's kind of RNG based, right? If you are able to negate your opponent's weapon skill, chain them off, or even chain them off first, and then win with more HP and carry on the buff to the next round, I think Pip Vice is definitely really solid there. If not, I think Pip Vice will just remain as what she is, right? Because her kit is like, her chasing capabilities is not as strong, and the swinging animation is kind of one of the bigger downfall for her in terms of arena. Cause like, you know, you hit your opponent one time, and then the second swing your opponent can escape from it. So she's not as strong as a dogfight unit, and she also doesn't have any debuffs, which doesn't warrant her like a meta unit status. Like all the meta units in the pool right now has some form of like debuffs, or even like a self buff from their normal ability. Whereas Pip Vice, yes, she does have a self buff, but it's from the chain skill, so you only get it if you're able to chain your opponent, which is not the most desired scenario. That's why I think she'll either remain the same, or she will be like seeing way more use after the patch. But should you pull for her? I think probably not, because she's really niche. Like, she's only fixed to a fire team, and like a fire melee one at that. So I really won't recommend newcomers to pull for her. Like, she's probably a unit you can go for if you are like in like a middle of the pack, you have a few solid fire melee units, and you want to complete your fire melee team, then you can pull for her. But if not, I strongly don't recommend newcomers to pull for her. Okay, so that's pretty much it for this who to pull video. Thank you very much for watching. As usual, do remember to like and subscribe in order to see more videos from the channel. I'll see you guys again in my next video. Bye guys.